Hi, I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, fire breaks out in the mountains near Julian. Hundreds of homes are evacuated. We'll have the latest.
And child refugees continue to fly into San Diego for processing. I'm Peggy Pico with Congressman Juan Vargas and Border Patrol for an in-depth look at the refugee controversy. Then, 3 years after the Fukushima nuclear plant meltdown, surfers hit the waves. What scares them more than radiation?
And we'll have a special report looking at the state of SeaWorld's marine mammals. How do they compare to animals in the wild? KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Fire crews are making some progress, good progress, in fact, tonight on a wildfire near Julian. The Banner Fire started this morning off Highway 78 in the East County. Nearly 200 homes were evacuated. You could see the smoke for miles. The fire has burned about 150 acres. 2 homes have been destroyed. KPBS reporter Eric Anderson is just back from Julian. He joins us now from the newsroom. Eric, tell us what you saw.
Well, it's much what you see in any fire situation in the county. It starts with that big plume that we saw pictures of just a minute ago. You track that and you get a little bit closer and you start to see the fire engines on the road. You start to see the police officers on the road. When I went up through Julian on my way there, you not only saw that, but there was a big congregation of people at the high school. That was the early evacuation center. And just a little bit to the east of there is where most of that fire activity then happened. What it is there's a canyon that sort of runs up the side of that mountain, from the desert floor all the way to the top. And as you get higher in the elevation, there are big pine trees there. And the fire kind of rushed up that canyon, and it started to burn into those pine trees. But since this was a fuel-driven fire, meaning it was burning where the fuel was and not a wind-driven fire, when it got to the top of that canyon, where the homes are kind of rimmed around the top, right, that's when it slowed down a little bit, gave firefighters a chance to sort of get on top of the flames.
And Eric, this is the same area where the Albar Shrine, Mount Laguna Shrine Camp burned just a year ago. 116 cabins there?
It's not technically the same area. The Albar Shrine was a little bit to the south of there, but it's in that same sort of rugged area. The fire started lower on the mountain and then burned up the side of the mountain into these neighborhoods. If you've ever been up to that neighborhood, it's really picturesque for the people who live on the rim of this canyon. You're in pine wooded forest, and then you can look out over the rim of the canyon and see just a wonderful panorama in front of you. But of course, what happens during these cases is it creates the sort of chimney for these fires to kind of run up next to the houses. In this case, firefighters saved a lot of the houses that were in there. When I first arrived, I looked down at the ground and I thought, oh, this is red clay down here, but it wasn't really red clay. It was just dirt that had already had retardant dropped on it. So aerial firefighters were working that area pretty hard today to make sure that they protected as many homes as possible. Of course, 2 of those homes and an outbuilding, I guess, were burned out. So they didn't save everything, but there are a lot of people around the rim of that canyon today, including people I talked to who are very thankful that their homes are still there tonight.
Yeah, let's hear from some of those folks you talked to right now. We have a clip.
Actually just got here about 45 minutes ago, and we were able to keep in contact with our neighbor, Jesse. He and another neighbor are the ones that started fighting the fire here because there wasn't anybody here right at that time. So we have lots of water spouts
And of course, the firefighters were wrapping up the afternoon, working along the edges of that fire. They were putting out hot spots. And they said they expect to be there all night, making sure that there's no reignition and the fire doesn't take off again.
KPBS reporter Eric Anderson. Of course, we will continue to follow the progress of the fire here on Evening Edition and online at kpbs.org. In other news tonight, another plane carrying Central American immigrants is expected to arrive in Southern California tomorrow. Border Patrol is not saying where they will go, but folks in Murrieta are planning another protest outside the Border Patrol station there. You may recall on Tuesday they were able to turn away 3 busloads of migrants who were supposed to be processed at the Murrieta station. They're being brought in from Texas because agents are overwhelmed there by a surge of arrivals crossing illegally to escape claims of violence and trafficking, among other things. At least 52,000 people since October. Many of them are children. The border crisis led to a congressional hearing earlier today in Texas. Governor Rick Perry told a House committee that the U.S.-Mexico border is less secure now than at any time in the recent past.
My message to President Obama is to secure this border, Mr. President. Finally.
Perry wants Obama to come to the border for a first-hand look at the problem.
The president has a very good sense of what's happening on the border. He's getting regular updates from his officials who've traveled to that region. They're focused on solving this problem. And what the president wants is he wants regular reports about what they're seeing on the border and how resources that are being devoted to processing these, those who have appeared at the border, are being used to effectively administrate justice.
San Diego political leaders are also weighing in tonight on the issue. Congressman Scott Peters is calling for action.
Look, what we need a comprehensive immigration reform, and there's no reason not to do it. There's support across the political spectrum, from the Chamber of Commerce to the labor unions, the farmers, the farm growers, the farm workers, the tech community, the faith community. Everyone knows it's broken. We come to a solution in the Senate, which isn't perfect, but would deal with a lot of these issues, and we can't even get the House leadership, the Republicans, to let us vote on it in the House.
Until you secure the border, you can make all sorts of other changes in immigration rules, and it will still not solve the crisis of a steady flow of individuals breaking the law, crossing the border, and putting a strain on communities such as San Diego.
We now go to Peggy Pico and her guests for more on this debate.
Over the next several weeks, busloads of young immigrants are expected to arrive every 72 hours in Southern California. Here with more on how the federal government is dealing with the situation and what's next for the immigrants being processed in San Diego are my guests, San Diego Congressman Juan Vargas and Sean Moran, Vice President of the National Border Union. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure.
Congressman Vargas, you toured the San Ysidro facility where 3 busloads of refugees who were turned away at Murrieta a few days ago ended up being there. What's happening to those families there right now, and what happens next?
Sure. They're being processed. The Border Patrol is processing them, finding out who they are, if they have any issues, and going through that process. I mean, they've been doing it very, very professionally. In fact, I was able to tour, talk to some of them, and able to talk to the Border Patrol. And again, they're doing a superb job. They're just processing these people because they are arriving from other places. And again, I think they've bent over backwards to be kind to them. Most of these Border Patrol agents are parents too, and most of them are kids. And so they've been quite generous, I think, with their time and even their stuff. I talked to some agents who are bringing stuff from home, so they've been quite good.
Sean, how are the regional Border Patrol facilities preparing to receive more children? The expectation that we're going to receive more children and families over the next several weeks.
Well, obviously, we don't see a huge number of children on a regular basis, so we've had to stock up on supplies like diapers, formula, and other types of food that a child would more readily eat. So it's mostly been material goods that have been put in place, and we've also had agents obviously being prepared to process and shifting of some resources to accomplish that.
And what are you hearing from Border Patrol agents on dealing with this influx?
Well, there's concerns nationwide that we're taking away from our border enforcement duties. These people do have to be processed, as the Congressman said, but our concern is that our agents will not have enough backup. It'll put them at risk. And in some areas like the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas, the cartels are taking full advantage of that lack of manpower in the field.
Are you seeing an influx of cartel and drug trafficking across international borders?
We're seeing an overall general increase. Here in San Diego, we have seen more unaccompanied juveniles coming through some of the areas than we would normally have, but we're not seeing a huge influx like the Rio Grande Valley has.
And I wanted to get back talking about the families again, Congressman. What happens to these children and these families once they're processed? Where do they go?
Well, I don't know the whole process, to be frank, but I do know the ones I've talked to. My understanding is they'll be processed here. They will then have to go before a judge, a magistrate, to find out if they in fact have any reason why they can't stay, and if not, they will be deported. How that process all unfolds, I don't really know, to be honest with you. I've only seen what I've seen, and that is how we handle them both in Imperial County and here in San Diego. And so I don't really know the rest of the process.
And earlier this week, protesters in Murrieta illegally blocked access to 3 busloads of immigrants, and more protests are expected at that border facility tomorrow. What is your response to the genuine concerns about having refugees processed at nearby border stations?
I think it's absolutely outrageous that those buses were stopped, that federal agents were prohibited from doing their job. The Border Patrol has figured out that the best way to move some of these people is to put them at Murrieta so they can have more Border Patrol agents on the border and protect themselves. It's a big safety issue for the Border Patrol themselves. They don't want to pull agents off the border because not only do they have to make sure they catch people trying to cross illegally, but also protect themselves. Now we have to have more resources focused on Murrieta, so we're pulling people off the line once again. It's a disaster. I mean, those people should have been arrested. If they're standing in front of federal agents doing a job, and they're preventing the federal agents from doing their job, they should have all been arrested. They're making the situation worse. They're making it more dangerous for the Border Patrol along the border because we have to process these people. We have to process whether you're a juvenile, whether you're a mother, whether you're a horrible drug cartel. You got to process these people. And when they make it more difficult, they make the job of the Border Patrol more dangerous.
Let me ask both of you this, and I'll start with you, Sean, if you could, in a sentence. Tell me, what would you like to see the government do to help handle this situation as we're moving forward?
I think the top thing the administration can do is they need to close this loophole. We are rewarding people for breaking the law. Their goal is to get here to this country, and we're just facilitating that by releasing them once they've been processed. And that needs to stop, and I think then we would be able to get more of a handle on this situation and then change the laws permanently.
And the same question to you, what do we need to do moving forward?
Oh, we have to have comprehensive immigration reform. I mean, until you have some system that works, it's not going to work. And that's what we're seeing right now. It's just going to get worse, so we have to have some form of process where people can come legally. Otherwise, this is what you're going to have.
All right. Well, for more coverage on the child immigrant crisis, go to kpbs.org. I want to let folks know that. And Congressman Juan Vargas and Sean Moran, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
The VA says patient access to health care is getting better. It says it's reached out to nearly 140,000 vets in the past 2 months, trying to get them off waiting lists and into clinics. But despite the improvements, VA officials say there's more work to be done. We'll take a closer look at the situation here in San Diego tomorrow night, right here on Evening Edition. SeaWorld has been in the crosshairs of animal rights activists after a documentary on its killer whale shows. But an Associated Press study shows annual survival rates at SeaWorld are at or near the top of U.S. theme parks and aquariums. Suzette LeBoy brings us the story.
Sit back and enjoy the show.
Killer whales have been a star attraction at SeaWorld for decades. The spotlight on the creatures intensified after the documentary Blackfish raised questions about their captivity.
SeaWorld continues to exploit these complex and very socially interactive animals.
But an AP analysis of federal data shows the annual survival rates for marine mammals at SeaWorld's 3 parks are at or near the top of all U.S. parks and aquariums.
There's one. Ready? Oh.
Did he get it? Among the findings, bottlenose dolphins and California sea lions here live longer than those in the wild. Overall, killer whales in captivity don't live as long as their counterparts in the wild. But SeaWorld orcas born in captivity live about as long as those in the wild population. SeaWorld officials say advancements in medical care have improved the survival rates.
It's that ability to have access to them that is the key difference. We don't have that capacity with animals in the wild, so they're sort of hidden behind a veil.
On recent visits to the park in Orlando, killer whale Kayla gave urine samples on command. In another pool, a pregnant dolphin named Bassa had an ultrasound, and a trainer comforted Freddie the pilot whale as a park vet drew blood.
We can get what we need with barely interrupting their day. So I think that there's been a lot more emphasis on husbandry training and preventive medicine.
But John Jett, a former trainer of killer whales at SeaWorld, including Tillicum, who killed a veteran trainer in 2010, says improvements in medical care don't address the quality of life in captivity.
It's impossible to mitigate the spatial effects of living in a concrete box. The first time I saw killer whales in the wild, I sobbed. I mean, I couldn't stop crying. It was such a stark difference.
He and other activists are pushing for SeaWorld to become a rehabilitation and release center. SeaWorld officials say their work with animals helps provide a better understanding of their counterparts in the wild. Suzette LeBoy, Associated Press.
A San Diego scientist says the United Nations is letting politics get in the way of progress on climate change. KPBS science reporter David Wagner joins us now to explain. So what's this dispute about, David?
Well, every few years, the UN taps a bunch of scientists to put out a report on addressing climate change. And UC San Diego's David Victor was one of them. But he was upset to find that the report's summary for policymakers left out important facts and figures about which countries drive carbon emissions. He says that pointing out the world's worst offenders was just too politically controversial. So this week, Victor and his colleagues are publishing that information in the journal Science. In an interview with KPBS, he said policymakers have overstepped their bounds and are intruding on the scientific process.
Which countries are actually emitting most of the carbon?
So high-income countries like the United States and nations in Europe are still among the world's top emitters. But Victor also made an effort to note that the biggest spike in emissions are coming from rapidly developing countries. That would include countries like China, Brazil, Indonesia. Victor knows that singling out specific countries can be politically unpopular, but he says we can't address climate change without talking about who's driving it.
KPBS science reporter David Wagner. It's been 3 years since an earthquake-triggered tsunami caused a meltdown at Japan's Fukushima nuclear plant. Many residents from the area have not returned, but as Peggy Pico tells us, some come back often to surf.
Japanese officials continue to monitor radiation leaks into ground and seawater near the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant. Here in the U.S., scientists also continue to monitor kelp beds for radiation from the fallout. But just a few miles from Fukushima's power plant, surfers are riding the waves. San Diego journalist Kimball Taylor went to Japan to find out why and wrote a feature article about it for the August issue of Surfer magazine. Kimball, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, you said you were surprised to hear some of the surfers were back in the water. How many are surfing near the power plant?
Well, estimations I get from local surfers is that about 10% just quit surfing, 20% moved as far away as Okinawa or Osaka, and about 50% eventually returned. They didn't surf for a year, 2 years after the event.
Now, you asked surfers about radiation levels in the water. Aren't they afraid of being contaminated with the radiation?
Well, that was my perspective coming from the west coast of the United States. We were just thinking radiation, radiation, radiation. But when I got to the area and I started talking to local surfers, many of them said, no, we just don't think about that.
So radiation wasn't an issue. What was an issue? Do they have other concerns?
Well, what I didn't really conceptualize before I went there was that in a small area, 17,000 people died from the tsunami. So there was respect for the dead and for that loss built into it. And I was talking to one surfer and I said, well, if you don't think about radiation, why didn't you surf for a year? And he said, because of the ghosts at the beach.
Being the people who died in the earthquake and the aftermath.
And it wasn't the way that we might think of an apparition. It was when you go to the beach, you see all this debris. You see socks, you see children's toys, you see family photos.
So you still see that stuff. And why are they surfing there, though? Why are these surfers saying that the 50 or so % going back in the water? They think it's okay?
Well, it has to do with the culture. Mainly, for the most part, the elderly in these communities don't want to move. Either they can't or they can't readjust, and their children, they have to take care of them. And so if they're going to take care of them, they have to remain. And if they remain, they just decide, hey, I want to live my life. I want to be able to have fun. I don't want to stress, and I'm just going to continue to do the things that I did before.
Now, we briefly just saw some pictures of the area. It's been 3 years since the 9.0 earthquake. Describe for us a little bit more in detail what the beaches and the neighborhoods in Fukushima still look like today.
Well, everywhere you see reconstruction, that's the biggest going concern there at the moment. But when I first went to the beach, I thought, oh, look at all this grassland. That's nice to have before you get to the beach. But then I turned my head left and right, and I saw these slabs that were cleaned of their houses. And by seeing the number of slabs, I knew how dense the neighborhoods actually were before the tsunami. And that's when it really sunk in what had happened there.
And that's why you had to clear that. Now, you're a surfer. Did you go in the water?
No, I didn't.
How come?
Well, the whole point was to surf, and so we're going along the coast. Imagine going from, say, San Diego and driving up towards San Onofre and checking all the surf spots. But the water's 40 degrees, there's snow flurries on the beach, and I have my little Geiger counter, and I'm walking along, and I'm measuring tsunami trash, and it's pinging and ticking and all of this stuff, and I just looked at the surf, and I thought, nah.
Not joining in that day. Yeah. What are some of the lingering concerns of the people still living in Fukushima?
Well, the event is not over. There's an estimate of 400 tons of contaminated groundwater coming through underneath the Fukushima Daiichi plant every day. And some of that is leaking into the basements, and TEPCO, the company that owns the plant, they're sucking in that up, and they're putting in these tanks. And they don't know how to clean that water. And each tank represents about 10% of the radiation of the initial event. So 10 tanks is the complete event. And so they have thousands of tanks that they don't know how to clean. They don't know what to do. All they can do is build more tanks and keep sucking up that water. So this is, excuse me, this is not over by any means.
If you had to say, and this has to be we have to end on this, your takeaway from this experience in visiting Japan and watching these surfers and watching this community, what would it be?
It would be that how we react to devastation is cultural. What they have chosen to do in Japan is completely different than, I think, how we might behave.
How so? How might we behave differently?
Well, I mentioned a lot of people decided to stay in these neighborhoods and these towns that were affected because they go generations deep in each little pocket. Whereas here in the West, we're maybe only a couple of generations deep, and if something had happened at San Onofre, I imagine that a lot of people would leave, and the tourism would be destroyed, and it would be much more traumatic, I think.
It sounds like you have a lot more to say, and I know you do. I want to let folks know they can catch Kimball Taylor's complete story on the August issue of Surfer Magazine. Kimball Taylor, thank you so much.
I'm Judy Woodruff on the next News Hour. What the latest jobs report says about the state of the economy. That's Thursday on the PBS News Hour.
Drivers will pay more at the gas pump this holiday weekend. AAA says the average price has gone up 5 cents over the past 10 days. It's $4.15 a gallon here in San Diego, the highest price for a 4th of July weekend since 2008. San Diego lifeguards say the 4th weekend is usually their busiest holiday. Last year, more than 1 million people visited beaches here over the holiday weekend. High surf is expected this weekend. Waves on Sunday and Monday might reach 7 feet. Lifeguards say the high surf can cause rip currents, so be sure to swim near a lifeguard station and ask a lifeguard about surf conditions before going in the water. Police and other public safety officials will also be busy this weekend. They'll be participating in the county-wide effort called Operation Safeguard. It's aimed at preventing alcohol-related deaths and injuries and, of course, underage drinking. There will be sobriety checkpoints out, roving DUI patrols, and extra enforcement of social host laws, which hold homeowners accountable for underage drinking at parties on their property. Well, if you're looking for a place to watch the Rockets' red glare tomorrow night, take a look at this. As you can see, we have more information about the fireworks shows online at kpbs.org/fireworks. It's going to be warm as well this weekend, as we mentioned a moment ago. High surf expected along the coast. Temperatures mostly in the mid-70s. Look for mid-80s for the inland valleys for the next few days. Humid as well, with a slight chance of thunderstorms tomorrow. Those thunderstorms are expected in the mountain areas as well right through the weekend, where temperatures will be in the low to mid-80s. And a mixed bag for the desert. Sun tomorrow, thunderstorms on Saturday, back to sun on Sunday, with triple-digit temperatures across the board. Let's recap our top stories tonight. Firefighters are getting the upper hand on a wildfire in the East County mountains near Julian. The banner fire started just off Highway 78, but the smoke could be seen from many miles away. The fire's burned about 150 acres tonight. It's destroyed 2 homes. Of course, last year, an 11-square-mile fire burned near the same area, more than 100 cabins, not far from today's site. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.